Hello and welcome to Seminary Reacts, where we ask professors to react to Reddit questions and stories. Today I am joined by AMBS professor David Cramer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your passions are, what you've taught before?
Sure. So I'm a theologian by training. My area of emphasis is Christian social ethics. I didn't go the traditional academic route with that, so I worked in Christian publishing, and I was a pastor for about a decade at a little neighborhood church in South Bend. That's a part of the Mennonite Church USA, and then for about the last 8 years, I think I've been teaching some here at AMBS. I teach the class Christian Attitudes to War, Peace, and Revolution, and then I've taught some theology courses and some Bible courses, so just kind of a utility person for whatever they need.
Yeah, it seems like you're in a lot of different areas. Yeah. And to this point, what is your experience with Reddit?
So I, believe it or not, am like right on the border of like the millennial generation. So I have some familiarity with Reddit. One of my college friends was like early to get into it, so most of it is like vicariously through him. Like he's omnipresent on Reddit. But I'll just dip in on occasion when I have like a curiosity to look up. So yeah.
And are there particular parts of Reddit that you find yourself on a lot, or?
No, it's typically just like literally if I'm curious about a topic and Reddit seems like a way to have like crowdsourcing to answer that, I'll seek that out.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are going to be getting into Reddit today, that's
Right,
for
let's do
sure.
it.
Are you ready for our first story here?
Let's go.
So our first story is coming from the subreddit 2hottakes, which is a popular subreddit that's connected to a YouTube channel that reads Reddit stories. So we're kind of borrowing from them.
All right.
So the title of this post is, "My roommate doesn't want to live with me again after I watched Jurassic Park movies while his girlfriend was at our apartment. I, a 22-year-old male, am finishing up my last year of college and live with my best friend, a 23-year-old male. He has a girlfriend who is 20-year-old female that he's been with for about 6 months. She is pretty shy, and whenever she's at our apartment, they are pretty much always just hanging out in my friend's room. They will very rarely hang out in the common areas for extended amounts of time, so suffice to say that even though I've known her for a half a year, I know very little about her and wouldn't say I know her very well personally. This weekend, I was scrolling through Netflix to find something to put on in the background while I study for finals. I found The Land Before Time, which was one of my favorite movies growing up because my older brother used to always play it for me when he babysat me. So I turned it on and just kind of had it on. My roommate and his girlfriend came by, and my roommate noticed the movie I was watching. He commented that he hasn't seen it in years since he was a kid. He asked his girlfriend if she had ever seen it, and she said no. She said that she wasn't allowed to watch any movies with dinosaurs because her religion doesn't believe in them and believe that their fossils were put in the ground by God as a test. Needless to say, I was caught off guard. Of course, I had a million questions, but for some reason my brain went towards dinosaur movies instead of her religion. I asked if she had seen any of the Jurassic Park movies, and she said no. I told her some of them are really good and suggested that we have a dinosaur movie marathon. She said she doesn't want to watch any movie that goes against her beliefs. I just said okay and didn't push it, and they quickly retreated back into my roommate's room. But it did kind of make me want to watch Jurassic Park movies. I have the first two on Blu-ray, so I found those and started watching them. Neither my roommate or his girlfriend came out of the room much the rest of the day except for to get something from the kitchen or to go to the bathroom. After I finished the second movie, I left to meet up with some friends. I stayed at a friend's place that night after drinking, and when I got back to my place, my roommate immediately laid into me. He said that I was very disrespectful to his girlfriend by playing Jurassic Park movies immediately after she told me it goes against her religious beliefs. He said I made her very uncomfortable and that they both agree I did it on purpose to mock her beliefs. I told him I don't care at all about her beliefs and all that I did was watch movies in my own place. I told him it's not my problem what her religious beliefs are. If she gets that upset about dinosaur movies, then I'm honestly kind of surprised she can go through day-to-day life without having an existential breakdown. He told me that he doesn't want to live with me again after our lease is up at the end of the month. we had already been looking at renewing our lease or finding a new place, but I think they are seriously overreacting. So I guess this person is going to two hot takes just to figure out like am I in the wrong in this situation? So what do you think?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, yeah.
First of all, I mean, I just feel for this woman whose like childhood has been deprived for not being able to watch Land Before Time. Like, I grew up in a pretty conservative house, but that was not something that was like out of
Mhm.
bounds for us.
You were
And
allowed to watch Land Before Time?
we
That's
went to
good,
the
that's
theater.
good.
Actually, I think the library had a special viewing of it, so we were able to go
Oh.
to that. And then yeah, we had like probably 6 VHSs in our whole collection, but the original Jurassic Park was one of them. So
Mm.
I mean, she could stop after the first one and be okay. Like everything after that, that's fine. Um, but I think to get to a little bit more of the root of maybe what's going on there, I mean, first of all, just respect other people's religions. So if he was trying to do that to like, you know, stick it to or whatever, that's probably not cool. Like if someone doesn't eat meat, then have a vegetarian meal. It's a very
Mhm.
Pauline concept of like deferring to somebody's
Mhm. Yeah,
own
yeah.
sort of religious convictions. So there's that. Um, but then I think if you peel back some of the layers of what's going on, it really gets into some like theological and even like hermeneutical questions. So I don't know what religion she espouses. I suspect it's some form of fundamentalist Christianity because I've heard sort of that take before of like the fossils being planted there to test us.
Mhm.
I think that raises some questions about God's character. Like, why would God do that? Like, why would
Right,
God
right.
test us in that way? Um, and then also it gets into biblical interpretation because that probably is working backwards from like a pretty straightforward reading of the early chapters of Genesis or creation accounts, where if you start from the premise of the creation accounts are giving a sort of literal play-by-play of what's going on, then there really isn't a whole lot of room for dinosaurs. So,
Mhm.
in that sense, I kind of respect this woman for taking it to its logical conclusion because there are some like ministries that both want to hold to a young Earth creationist account and have a place for dinosaurs. And
Mhm.
so there's like, you know, humans riding around on dinosaurs and stuff. And I don't think that's the way to come at it. So if you're going to go for it, you might as well go all in. But yeah, I think like there's just so many richer ways of understanding what's going on in the creation accounts than that sort of like ripped from the newspaper play by play. I know you had a distinguished Hebrew Bible professor on before, so I won't
Yeah.
steal her thunder, but put a plug in for taking her classes to
Right, right.
come at some more nuanced ways of understanding those texts. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I guess in those classes we didn't talk in depth about dinosaurs, but if we had asked, she would have
Yeah.
indulged in that conversation for sure.
Plus, like, there are passages of scripture, like in Job, that talk about these, like, leviathans or these, you know,
Mm.
ancient creatures that I think have some parallels to dinosaurs. So there's even some biblical precedent for them. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I just think in general, like, um, if your religious belief is causing you to, like, doubt generally accepted science, then I think there could be a problem there. That's not to say they don't ever conflict, but I think all truth is God's truth, and I don't think God created the world in such a way to like test us on
Mm.
our faith or whatever. And so there's a lot of good resources out there for understanding the compatibility. One of my friends works at an organization called Biologos that does a lot with faith and science. So this person could look up
Yeah, yeah.
their work and see what they have to say about it.
Right, right. And I know you kind of mentioned, like, in this situation, looking at the way that this person is kind of interacting with the roommate's girlfriend, um, I know you had kind of mentioned, like, a Pauline idea of kind of, like, respecting the space that other people are in. I know, like, in this situation, he's like, this person's argument is that he's living in his own home,
Mhm.
and he says, like, even if the girlfriend is there, she's not in the main space, and really says, like, "I wasn't doing anything wrong by doing this, I
Mhm.
wasn't trying to shove things in her face." But do you feel like there was a way he should have gone about that differently?
I mean, I would wonder how self-reflective he is in his narration of what happened. Like, the way it's narrated is like, "Conversation about dinosaur movies made me think
Right.
about Jurassic Park, and I hadn't watched it in a while." So, like, it sounds very innocent the way it's kinda laid out. But I do think just having a moment to step back and think, like, empathetically and think in terms of, like, hospitality,
Mm,
there might have been some better ways to come at it. Having said that, I think in the other direction, things can go against your religious beliefs without being offensive.
yeah.
And so, like, I'll watch fantasy movies that I don't think are literally how the world is,
Yeah, yeah.
Lord of the Rings or whatever, and that doesn't offend me because it goes against my belief, I guess. And so I think this woman could enjoy the movies as a form of fantasy, even if she doesn't believe that it's literally based on fact. And I mean, as far as that goes, it's cartoon talking dinosaurs, so
Right.
I don't believe those existed either.
Right, right, right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Dinosaurs that speak English.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Or dinosaurs that live in the 21st century because of some sort of DNA reconstruction or whatever.
Right.
So
Right. So kind of like, I mean, in this space, just kind of recognizing like this might be like to the girlfriend, it might seem like this is an inhospitable action. And I could see how there's the reaction of like feeling like it's being kind of thrown in her face, like
mhm,
after this conversation for sure. So it seems like there would be room for sensitivity to it. And it also seems like, I mean, it seems like there needs to be a better conversation held here.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I know one of the comments that were on this post, someone said, "You didn't do anything disrespectful. You turned on the movies when she wasn't even in the room. And like you said, they never hang out in the common area. So why all of a sudden?" And it seems like she's a bit too serious if she reacted that way. And your roommate didn't even come to you and make a compromise or anything like that. It was an immediate, "I'm not living with you anymore, OP." And they say, "I wouldn't even want to reside with him anymore at this point." So
Yeah, I mean, I believe in forgiveness and reconciliation.
yeah.
And I also believe that there are times where it's okay to release people. Like, we're not forced into
Right.
a certain relationship just because I was this person's college friend or roommate doesn't mean we have to be lifelong friends or roommates. And so it could be a good sign that, like, it's time to let the sun set on that particular form of relationship. And maybe with a little
Mhm.
bit of distance, they can reestablish some sort of friendship going forward.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Are you ready for our next post?
Yeah, I hope it's as fun as the last one.
Well, it's definitely a fun question.
Okay.
Definitely a challenging post here. So, this post comes from the subreddit Christianity, and the title of the post is "I'm concerned prayer doesn't work." So this person says, "I am. I had posted about this previously in a thing about visiting my home church some years after I left and stopped going to churches entirely. Yesterday, I visited my home church, and when the prayer requests were being read, the same families who were stuck with constant health issues for generations still had a plethora of health problems. The little boy with a rare disease that's been in and out of hospitals since birth is still doing horribly. When I was there last, he was hospitalized for the 20th time at 2 years old, and he's 11 now and still doing horribly. It made me so upset, and while I wanted to pray for these people in hopes that they can get better, hearing these things have never gotten any better, even though lots of people pray for them nearly every day for decades, made me feel like prayer doesn't work. I can't even recall an instance where I had a prayer answered that I could have achieved anyways without prayer. I used to blame myself for other people's death or health problems because I never prayed enough, but it doesn't even matter. To me, the only people I've seen stuck with serious health problems or money issues are the devout. It's always the believers that are struggling, and it's not like they're being tested. They came into suffering and have just stayed that way. For some sick reason, God wants it to be that way, and I will never understand it. It makes me feel like there isn't a God, or perhaps there's a completely different entity harming Christians, since Christians are the only ones with a plethora of health issues. I wish polytheism was real because then you can pray to this or that goddess or god of whatever, and you have about 1 to 2 to 4 predictable outcomes. You pray to the goddess of fortune, you're expecting wealth to some degree, either small or large, less wealth, or nothing at all. With God, you have no idea and you have to wait. Usually nothing happens, and or everything gets worse. Why are good things happening after prayer? Why are good things happening after prayer such a rarity? They must be completely coincidental. I can't even bring myself to believe in the idea that prayer holds power when some people pray for so long and get nothing in return. Heaven isn't rewarding enough, life is a gift too, and it's a sick game if God doesn't allow people to enjoy it. I apologize for my anger, bluntness, and cynicism. Seeing this just killed the only scrap of faith I had.
So, yeah, I mean, as a pastor and theologian, like, this is something that, like, it's one of the most pressing
Right.
and perennial questions. And I think it's kind of a subset of a larger question of the problem of evil, which we could unpack if you want, but we'll stick to the prayer question for now. So I think like a couple things. One would be, how is this person viewing prayer? It seems like with the desire for like the polytheistic, where you have the different gods to pray to, it seems like there's sort of a transactional or mechanistic like understanding of prayer. Like, if I just ask for a certain level of fortune and this God provides it, then we're good. And
Mhm.
and I think unfortunately that's the way a lot of churches do condition people to think about prayer. And so even earlier on in the story when OP was saying like, we have the prayer requests and it's the same people giving the prayer requests, like that that way of thinking about prayer. And that's what I grew up with too, is like you take time to say who has prayer requests and who has praises. And praises were pretty much just reports on things that were answers to earlier prayer requests.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like this genie in the bottle kind of thing of like, I want something to happen. I go to the omnipotent being and get them to do that. Um, and I think in scripture, like, there's definitely some passages that suggest that there is that kind of transactional thing, like the prayer of the righteous availeth much, or whatever the King
Mm.
James says, or some of Jesus's parables can be read in that way. But I think, like, taking a broader view of scripture, prayer is a much more textured, nuanced kind of um, engagement with the divine. And so you have the Psalms where King David or others are basically crying out to God with similar types of concerns as this person. Even
Yeah,
Jesus on the cross,
yeah.
who's quoting a psalm, is like,
Mhm.
my God, why have you forsaken me? Like,
Right.
why haven't you used your power to come down and save me? And so, um, so there's that, just how we understand prayer and like how we understand what it means for prayer to work or not work. Um, I think prayer can be used as a way to distance ourselves from other people's pain, or as a
Mm.
way to enter into those people's pain. And it seems like that's what this person's wrestling with. Like, when I come to church and I see these people and I see their pain and I see that it hasn't gone away, it does something to me. It shakes my faith, and so it's better for me just to like keep distant. And I think we see the same type of mentality in like politicians, for example, who, when some atrocity happens, they say, well, thoughts and prayers.
Right.
And that's basically
Right.
code for like, I'm not going to do anything about it.
Mhm.
Um, in fact, I might pass legislation that makes it more likely that that is going to
Right.
happen the next time around.
Right,
And
right.
so it's using prayer as a way to distance from the pain, like thoughts and prayers, not going to act. But there's another way of viewing prayer where it's entering in to that pain in solidarity with the person.
Mm.
And so in my own family, my dad had cancer, and we prayed for him on many occasions. He was anointed with oil by the pastors at our church and never got healed. And so there's one sense in which you could say, well, our prayers didn't work. But there's another sense in which those times of like praying as a family or as a church brought people in who otherwise may not have been as close to my family or as close to my dad. But they're saying, okay, I see this pain that he's experiencing. I'm going to petition God on his behalf, and it kind of creates more of a collective sense of solidarity. That might not be what works means to the OP, and so I definitely don't like fault them for having that question be something that rattles their faith, because I do think the problem of evil or the problem of pain is one of the main problems for our faith. And if you haven't like questioned God at some point because of the evils of this world, then maybe your faith needs a little bit of deepening.
Right,
And so I would rather someone conscientiously say, I cannot continue doing this because it seems like God doesn't care or isn't powerful enough to answer, than just to like turn their brain off and keep on participating. So in a sense, like their journey might be deepening in this moment of saying like, I'm questioning, or I'm even turning away for this time.
right, right, right. And I think like you've spoken here to the impact of prayer for people, and that offering of like, oh, we'll say a prayer for this person, and the way that that kind of has solidarity. There's one comment that I want to read that kind of talks about like gives this person's interpretation of what prayer is doing for the individual person, and I'm wondering
Yeah.
what you think of that. So this commenter says, to this statement of whether or not prayer works, if prayer is pointless and all this stuff. They say it depends in large part on what you think prayer is for. I've come to understand it as changing us, not God, aligning our wills with God's, which is very slow work indeed. Sadly, we've come to understand prayer as something of a cosmic ATM. Input the right code, and our request will be answered. Famously, Jesus is faced with only silence when he asks for the cup of suffering to be taken from him in Gethsemane. Prayer strengthens his resolve to perfectly live out the will of his Father, to make God's love plain for all to see.
Yeah, so I think Shane Claiborne has a book, something about like how prayer changes us, so they could look that up. I don't want to go too far in that direction. Like, I do think there's a sense in which we are intended to be co-participants in what God is doing in the world. And so we can both petition God to enter into the world and make something happen while also letting prayer change us. So it's not necessarily an either or. If you look at the Lord's Prayer, like literally how Jesus taught his disciples to pray, there's a little bit of that both and going on. So there is
Right,
the
right.
give us today our daily bread. That's pretty much straight up petitioning. But then there's also the involvement of forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, or um, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So wanting heaven and earth to kind of collide in some way. So there's I think, a bringing together of aligning our will with God's will. And I think when that happens, we see that suffering and pain and evil is not how it's supposed to be. And we should react with the same kind of revulsion this person is reacting with, but also at the same time recognizing that that's how God views it too. And so it may not come as a surprise to you at this Mennonite seminary that I'm not of a Calvinist persuasion,
Right,
where God
right.
is sort of, determining everything that's going on behind the scenes. I think there really is some sort of cosmic conflict where there are things that go against God's will. And so praying for God to overcome those things is praying in alignment with what God ultimately desires.
Yeah, which I mean, it's interesting you say that, because the other comment that I pulled out to this post is someone saying, I don't see how prayer serves any purpose at all, since God already knows all our thoughts. His will is already done, so it seems ridiculous for people to ask for that or any contradictions. Ever since childhood, I've never understood how prayer serves any purpose at all, since nothing ever really comes out of it, and people talk to God via thought without praying. So kind of speaks to this idea of like, well, God already decided this, and it decided that this is exactly the way that this is going to happen. So speaking to God wouldn't do anything. And I mean, that seems to be a pretty common interpretation of who God is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that free will and foreknowledge and determinism, there's a lot of philosophical questions that can get tied up in that. And
Right,
so
right.
if you think about like any time traveling movie, this question always comes up of like, if I act in some way, it's going to set the trajectory in a different way and mess everything up or whatever. And so I think there's kind of that notion that like there's only one way the world's supposed to go. God's known it from all time. And so prayer doesn't really affect that in one way or the other. Um, and that's just not my view.
Yeah, yeah. Ready for our next post here? So this next one is coming from the subreddit True Unpopular Opinion, where people are putting unpopular opinions up. And this person says, "You can still be a good person without religion. You don't need a religious label to be a good person. You have a conscience for a reason. Religion is often used as a crutch nowadays to get away with being a bad person. Your God may excuse it time and time again, but real life consequences won't. I find that atheists and agnostics often have more morals and respect for other people than religious people do, and it's sad, honestly." And I will say most responses to this is that's not an unpopular opinion. So just starting from there, that the people who have already reacted to this have kind of said like, yeah, that's not an uncommon thing to think. But what do you think about this?
Um, I mean, in general, I would agree. I think, especially in Western society, atheists and agnostics are responding to a form of Christianity that I think oftentimes they're right to reject.
Hmm.
And so if you grow up in a religious culture where people aren't acting on the beliefs that they profess, and you're reading scripture, you're reading the Sermon on the Mount, and then
Mhm.
people are going out and not reflecting that at all, then I think it's a very reasonable response to reject that. But because of that, oftentimes those people do have a very like robust sense of morality because they're
Mhm.
actually trying to reclaim the morality that they thought their loved ones were trying to instill in them. And so their reaction against God is really a reaction against the God that isn't the God of love. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I do think a deeper question is like, can you be religious and be moral these days? Like, it seems like that's harder and harder to come by. Plenty of good examples of people who are, but yeah, I think theologically, again, don't mean to keep ragging on Calvinism tonight, but there's this notion of total depravity, which is like every one of our human capacities is fallen. And
Mhm.
so when you take that idea, the logical argument is even if outwardly you appear to be a good person, inwardly, because you aren't oriented to God, everything must be kind of off. So you're
Mhm.
doing it for um, pride or glory or whatever, and you have to kind of check your impulses. And there may be some truth to that, but I think we all have to wrestle with kind of our motivations for why
Right.
we do things. But
Right.
we're recording this just a day or two after the tragic death of Rob Reiner, and like by all accounts, religious, conservative, progressive, whatever, everyone's like he was just a great guy.
Mhm.
And so I think there are examples of people who don't profess faith but live it out better than some who do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting this idea of what you've brought up about like thinking about total depravity and whether or not humans are inherently good or evil. I know that was one of the other questions that I almost put in this
Mhm.
was about that topic. Just thinking about like I know there's that question with this of like what does it actually mean to be a good person? Because I know I mean some of the people that we might describe as Christians who are not being good would still describe themselves as good. And so there is a little bit of pushback there that I see with well, what does it actually mean to be a good person?
Mhm.
But I have seen and heard the expectation that like people saying that, like, oh, if somebody doesn't have a faith, if somebody is not a Christian or really any other religion, where are they getting their moral structure
Mhm.
from?
Mhm.
I mean, like, I've been in conversations with people who say, well, if you're not looking at the Bible, then what are you even looking at to figure
Mhm.
out what it means to be a good person? And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about
Yeah.
that.
So I guess those are kind of two slightly different questions. One is like, can you be a good person? And the other is like, what is your philosophical, theological justification for why you act the way you do?
Hmm.
And so, in some of the early chapters of Romans, Paul's like, there's people out there who don't have the law, and they're living it.
Mhm.
And so I think there's even biblical precedent for this notion. I mean, whatever we think about original sin or total depravity, I think biblically and theologically we have to understand that that's secondary to the more fundamental premise that we're made in the image of God. And so as humans, that image can be distorted, it can be um, blemished in different ways, but it can never be totally eliminated. And so I think, in as much as we are acting humanely and humanly, we're embodying that image of God within us. And I think that allows us to act good,
Mhm.
whether we have the kind of knowledge of why we're able to do that or not. So I don't think our sinful nature completely erases our imago Dei, as we say in
Yeah.
theology classes.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for the people who would make the argument, where are these people who aren't Christians getting their good morals from, if they have morals? Um, uh, I know we can talk about, like, the inherent nature of good and evil and things, but, um, what would you say to someone who made that argument to you that, well, where are they getting that from if
Uh-huh.
there is something that's not necessarily inherent about it?
Yeah. So
If
um,
if you think that there is something
yeah.
that's not necessarily
So
inherent about it.
uh, I would maybe turn to a children's story. So the last battle in the Chronicles of Narnia. Um, there's this scene toward the end where um, kind of the portal to the other world is opening up, and it's kind of
Mhm.
analogous to entering into heaven. And the people who have been battling against the Narnians are able to enter in, and they encounter Aslan, and they're like, "Well, we weren't worshiping you. We had our own god. We How can we, enter into this?" And I'm probably butchering this. It's been a long time since I've read it, but my recollection of it is Aslan is like, "Well, your worship was only worthy of me." And so,
Mm.
as I understand what Aslan is saying there, and C.S. Lewis being a deep Christian thinker, I think what
Right,
he's trying
right.
to convey is like, in as much as we are living um, a moral life, in as much as we are loving our neighbor, we are loving God through that. And
Mhm.
so we might not recognize it as such, but if we believe as Christians that there's only one God, God is one, as monotheists recite, then any act of goodness is an act toward God, who is
Mm.
good, who is the source of all good. And so that would be sort of like the metaphysical way of understanding it, is like God is the source of all goodness. We can participate in God, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And, people have different understandings of kind of where their moral compass comes from. And as Christians, I think we can hold to our understanding without trying to like impose it on others. And so
Right,
there's this
right, right.
theologian in the 1960s, I think, Carl Rayner, who talked about anonymous Christians. And it was people who kind of, despite what they said they believed, really were anonymous Christians. And I think that there's something to that. I think it's a little bit imperialistic to be like, well, you're a Christian even though you don't think it. So I wouldn't go that far. But I do think we can understand the source of morality and see that in someone else, even if they don't see where that's coming from in their own life.
Yeah, yeah. So it is a very complex issue, and I think I mean, I think this person who's posting is absolutely right in saying, like, you don't need to be a part of a religion to be a good person. But I mean, I think like we've kind of gotten to into the complexities of what that means
Yeah,
and
totally.
what this person has said here. Yeah, yeah. So our next question here is coming from the subreddit Christian, and the question is, "What's your favorite type of sermon?" Simple question for everyone, but what's your favorite type of sermon? Or in your opinion, what ingredients go into making a good sermon?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you are familiar with
Yeah.
lots
So
of types of sermons.
I'm ashamed to say I didn't study here at AMBS. I went to an evangelical seminary, and there we were taught like essentially there's only one way to do a sermon, which is expository, verse by verse, passage
Mm.
by passage. But
And actually, I'll say that was the most common answer in
okay,
the comments on this
yeah,
one.
okay, a lot of Theo bros in that thread. So I actually don't appreciate that way because most of scripture, I think, was not intended to be atomized in that way. So, like, the verses were added later on, the chapters were added later on, in terms of the numbering. And so, if you
Mm.
say, like, this morning we're going to read Galatians 2 1 through 6, and I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes expositing it in the Greek or whatever. That's just a very unnatural way. Like, I don't think when Paul sat down to write Galatians, he was thinking, someday there's going to be a 25-week sermon series on this book. Like, he was
Yeah.
ticked off at Peter and some other people. He sat down and wrote this thing, and I think the most natural way would be to read it all in one sitting if you could. But leaving that aside, I think more of a narrative approach of trying to take one digestible story or passage and not necessarily breaking down every term and its meaning or whatever. I almost never cite the original language. I'll use that to inform the way I preach, but I just think it comes across a little pedantic to be like,
Mm.
in the original Greek, this or that. But essentially trying to distill it into what's the one thing I want people to take away from this passage.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so instead of the 3-point sermon and all the background information, it's just like what is needed to drive home this one point that I think the author is trying to make or the text is making. And so to answer the question succinctly, I would say a short sermon with one point, often based in narrative, is kind of my jam. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, like, that's kind of, that is reflective of the way we had Alan on, he was on the first
Uh-huh.
episode, and that's kind of the way that he kinda goes about things is, like, you're really trying to hone in on one point, one theme, one image, and really focusing on that, and the other thing I really like that he says that I'll add is that he always wants to end with a note of good news.
Hmm.
And even in like with really devastating topics, it's kind of saying like there is a piece of good news at the end of this, not to like undermine the different harms
Hmm.
or difficult passages, but to still end with like if we are people of the good news of Jesus, like what are we left with here?
Totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Mennonites can often try to moralize things, and so you end with like, therefore go and do X.
Mhm.
And that's okay at times, but I agree with Alan that a sermon more often than not should be one variety of saying God loves you and go and do likewise, I guess.
Right.
So there is the
Right.
call to action, but I think it was Eugene Peterson who pastored a church for his entire career who said, like, basically, it's 52 weeks of saying essentially the same thing using
Mm.
different passages to say it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, you got to have the
Mm.
good news in there.
Right. Right. All right, so we have our last question here that
Okay.
is coming from the subreddit advice. And this one, I think this one's really interesting.
Okay.
The title is I sent an AI generated Jesus reel into the group chat. Are you familiar with all the words in that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Like we got the AI generated Jesus, but we got the reel and the group chat where everyone's sending things on Instagram, I think. Just wanted to make sure. Didn't want to make the assumption. So the post says, I saw an AI generated Jesus reel on Instagram where Jesus hugged a girl and a dog that later transformed into a human. Towards the end of the video, Jesus walked away, but he had robot legs, and when he turned around, he became a monster. I sent this to a group chat with 10 people because I found the dog's face funny without really considering how Jesus was portrayed. One of my friends who is religious humiliated me in the group chat, saying it was disrespectful and that I had become a bad person and that I should respect Jesus and more. Instead of apologizing right away, I tried to save face because the messages he sent felt like something that should have been discussed privately rather than in front of others. I told him it was just AI, but I realized that I might have sounded dismissive since Jesus was still used in the video. Should I apologize to him and discuss the humiliation privately, or did I deserve the public humiliation and owe him an apology?
Those are pretty stark either ors.
Yeah. Well, and I sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
go
I
ahead.
know, like, the two parts of this that I wanna talk about is, first of all, just the existence of AI-generated Jesus and
Mhm.
the idea of, like, whether or not it is a disrespectful thing, and, like, we can talk about the use of AI with that, and then also this question that this person's actually answering, which is, should I apologize and discuss it privately, or did I deserve this humiliation?
Mhm. So there are all kinds of moral quagmires when we get into AI.
Mhm, mhm.
So in my home community, there was just a county council meeting where the community came together and basically said, we don't want another huge data center put
Yeah,
into our
yeah,
community.
right,
So generally speaking, I think there's issues with AI, whether or not we're talking about Jesus
right.
involved in it. Um, so I would caution overuse of AI in general. Having said that, I think throughout the last 2,000 years, there have been myriad ways of depicting Jesus in art. I don't think of AI as the highest form of art. I think it's kind of a bastardized version of art, honestly. But I do think there are other religions where depicting holy figures would be considered very offensive
Right,
and
right.
should avoid doing that, AI or otherwise. I think with Christianity, there's always been a way to engage with who Jesus is in kind of less um, literal depictions. Um, And so we have pictures of Jesus with long flowy hair. Did Jesus look
Mhm.
like that or not? I don't know. We have pictures of Jesus painted as a black person. We have pictures of Jesus, in all different ways. And I think um, those are ways of showing that Jesus came among us, incarnated among us, and is in solidarity with us. And so I don't get offended when Jesus is depicted in a way that doesn't literally match my understanding of who Jesus might have, what Jesus looked like 2,000
Mhm.
years ago. Um, and then I think, like, in general, people on Reddit in general just take a chill pill. Like, you don't have to get offended about every religious thing. Like, Jesus getting robot legs, okay, it's weird, but, like, I think God can handle that. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think we have to worry about it too much.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. So, I guess, like, the other dynamic of this being, like, this person was called out in the group chat, and this person, they describe it as public humiliation, being called out for saying something disrespectful, something that was disrespecting the other person there, and so also then asking the question, "Did I deserve the public humiliation and owe him an apology?" Um, and I think, like, there's the 2 questions here, should I apologize to him and discuss the humiliation privately, or did I deserve the public humiliation and owe him an apology? And I think there's parts of both of these questions that I kind of say, like, "No, this is not an or thing." I think having a conversation privately is probably the way to go anyways, but, um yeah, there's also the dynamics here of, like, for someone who feels wronged, even if it might be seen as like, "Well, I don't actually think this is an offensive
Yeah.
thing." Yeah.
So I'll push back on that take a little bit in the sense that, like, I do think the church has tended to use Jesus' teaching in Matthew 18 in some harmful ways. And so that's where Jesus says, like, if you've been sinned against, go to that person one on one. If they fail to repent, then take another person. And so
Mm.
there's this whole process laid
Mhm.
out. And I think that passage is intended for um, one-on-one offenses where there's generally the same kind of like power dynamic at play. Someone did something, you just confront them and, hope that they're like, oh yeah, my bad. So this could fall under that, but at the same time, the person published it semi-publicly, like it was in this
Right.
group thing.
Right.
And so I think, yeah, maybe you could go to them privately, but also if you do something publicly, you could kind of expect a public response to it.
Hmm.
And so I never like it when, pastors get called out for doing something, saying something in a sermon that went viral or whatever, and they're like, oh, the person who was offended by that should have come to me personally. It's like, well,
Mm.
you put it out there for thousands to see. If
Hmm.
somebody writes a Reddit post about it or whatever, you kind of have to own that you've taken a public act and it can be responded to publicly, and sometimes needs to be responded to publicly. And so if this person really is not the OP, but the person that confronted them really is offended by this and feeling like it's harming the group in some way, for them to say that in that group, I don't think
Yeah.
necessarily transgress the Matthew 18 principle.
Hmm.
But I also think like it could be a pretty quick thing if the person just responded to the thread and said, the OP responded and said, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cause offense and I thought it was funny, but I won't do that again or whatever. Like,
Right.
again,
Right.
just take the temperature down a little bit, and
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way to do that without, because I think, like, what people might jump to in their minds is, like, responding publicly, so being like, "You're getting offended for things that are," like, addressing it in a way that's, like, really accusatory so that then it starts a fight, and then it's this
Mhm.
public fight. But I think there's ways of doing that and bringing it up, and, like, whether that's an apology or whether it's, like or even, like, saying, like, "Hey, you didn't need to say that in front of everyone,
Mhm.
but, like, sorry," and just kind of, like, saying it in a way that hopefully squash it, but still, like, address
Yeah, and I
that.
think the way they ask the question does get at some of the complexities of relational harm. So,
Mhm.
like, it could be that they both do need to apologize for
Right.
something different, but something that they both did, and that's the way to repair the relationship and move forward. And it
Mhm.
could be a quick and simple apology, like, I'm sorry that I humiliated you publicly. I didn't realize until you pointed that out to me. And the other person, I'm sorry I offended you for, your religious beliefs. I didn't realize that. And then you've both apologized, you've
Right.
both moved on, and you're all the better for it.
Yeah. 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 Well, what is your impression of all of this and Reddit and everything after kind of, like, seeing the Christian side of Reddit in this way?
um, I think it kind of reflects internet culture in the sense of like people tending to want like a pretty strong like right or wrong, yes or no
Oh,
kind
for
of
sure.
answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if you come to seminary, you'll see that there's a lot more gray, a lot more nuance, and that our faith can exist in that space without the sky falling. So
Right,
yeah.
right. Well, and I think what I tend to see with Reddit too is, like, maybe there is a particular, like, answer that a person commenting or even a person posting will say, like, "So this is the right answer here." But there are, like, often a lot of different answers. There's a lot of different ways that people have responded to some of these things, and I know that's something we've discussed in some of the past episodes is, like, but people are very much in their opinion of, like, "No, this is the correct answer here."
Mhm.
Um, and and this is the right answer, and there's a lot of certainty in that. So I definitely think, like you're right. Like, if for anyone who attends seminary and in a lot of other academic spaces, there's always, like, okay, there's more nuance here. It's not just black and white.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, having said that, I do appreciate that there is sort of this sense of like trying to work it out communally.
Right.
So you're coming to a
Right.
community, albeit a digital one, saying like,
Mhm.
here's this moral dilemma. How would you respond? And then you get to read a million responses to it and
Right.
kind of discern the best way to move forward in light of it. So
Right.
there's something good going on there, I
Right.
think.
And I think, like, in my experience on Reddit, at least, there can be a criticism of a lot of parts of Reddit, but I also think there is more room for nuance and conversation on this platform rather than on other social media platforms.
Yeah.
Partially, I think it's because, like other social media platforms, it's like you have to make a short comment, you have to make a short caption on your post so that people are paying attention to it, and there's more room for expanded thought on Reddit for sure.
Totally.
But yeah, it's definitely an interesting
Yeah.
platform.
Well, it's fun to react to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for reacting to these stories and these questions. There's a lot of good conversation we had about a lot of these topics, about prayer and about dinosaurs and about lots of fun things.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, yeah.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for listening to Seminary Reacts. Please leave us a like, a positive review, and comment any questions or stories for us to react to. You can find Seminary Reacts on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.